Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today I'm joined by Twan
Hello.
and by Issam.
Hi everybody.
Today we will be discussing the Ethias Cross in Leuven. And the men's race, it was a pretty interesting one. We saw a great battle between Aerts and Zweig. Once again, Issam, tell us more.
Yes, it was a very beautiful weather in the middle of November in Leuven. And we had a very fast start indeed from Zweig and Aerts, who quickly got a lead of around 10 seconds on a poor starting Iserbeat. We seems to be having a ritual of making poor starts, but okay. The good weather made it a fast race, and I think the parkour as well made it a very fast race. It was behind them. It was actually Iserbeat and Van Toerenhout who tried to chase both Zweig and Aerts down. Iserbeat was unable to follow actually Van Toerenhout, and it seemed to me that he had a very bad day. Van Toerenhout tried to close that gap. He wasn't able to do that, and Zweig played it very tactically by just sitting in the wheel of Aerts and saying, "Look, I have a teammate behind me. I have to sit on your wheels. I cannot help you." And Toon Aerts was in the lead till the last lap of the last corner, and in the end it was Zweig that took from him that victory in the sprint. So in the end it was Zweig that won that race in front of Toon Aerts, and rounding up the podium it was Van Toerenhout.
Aerts was pretty frustrated immediately after the race. In the flash interview, he said, "Every week I'm up here alone against these guys from the Pauwels Sauzen team." Whoa, that was a big blackout, but it's the Pauwels Sauzen team. Every week he says, "I'm up against 2 or 3 guys from them, and maybe I need to change tactic." Do you get his frustration?
I think this is a bit rude to Van der Haar because he might not always be up there, but he has been able to do some things in some crosses. Of course, for Toon Aerts, this can't be easy, especially on a parcours like today where someone really can just sit on your wheel the whole time without too many consequences, because it's just not the hardest parkour to just sit on someone's wheel with. And if Van Toerenhout keeps the pressure on, Zweig can just say, indeed, I'm just going to sit on your wheel the entire race and come out in the very last 100 meters.
Yeah, I think that indeed I don't think that Aerts was actually pointing out to the fact that he didn't have Van der Haar with him. I think it's more a shout to Nijs to say, "Look, I'm outnumbered by these guys. I cannot do it all the time. Like, if the races are going to be a more tactical race like it was with Leuven, then I might be missing out on a good spot, and I just need another guy." And don't forget they lost Quinten Hermans, Corné van Kessel. Those are guys that normally would play a role in these kind of races, maybe. So I think it's more a shout to say, "Look, I'm trying my best, I'm doing everything, but I'm getting outnumbered. I need help."
But do you think that at least his frustration is justified? Because, I mean, besides the question if his team does or doesn't provide enough support for him in the races, do you get that he's frustrated if he rides 45 minutes at the front of the race with Zweig just sitting in his wheel and not doing anything in the hope that Van Toerenhout and Iserbeat come back?
I think tactically he didn't play it well because he looked at it was with Zweig, and his initial thought was probably to not being outnumbered and having only one guy to fight against. The problem he had, of course, was that behind him there were 2 guys of Pauwels Sauzen chasing. So then Zweig was very easy. For him, it was very easy to say, "Okay, stay in your wheels. I'm not chasing you." I think that you would agree with me that if Aerts had a fair race against Zweig, that I would have loved to see that race, because I think Aerts would have won that race then. But now the tables are turned, and Zweig just could sit in the wheels and win the sprint in the end.
Yes, I think he would have won that sprint in a normal condition. It's not really known that much, but Aerts is actually a decent rider on the road as well. I remember 2019 Baloise Belgium Tour, he was doing pretty well. He got some KOM jerseys in some other races as well. So he definitely has that punch, and don't forget, he just in the last 50 meters Zweig was able to overtake him, and then Aerts sat up, but Aerts came pretty close, despite the fact that he did 75% of the work over the entire race, and I do think that he would have been able to win, and I do get his frustration as well, because if you are riding there day in, day out, and training, and then you come to a race, you're strong, arguably he was the strongest there, but then you get beaten.
Oh, he definitely was.
But then you get beaten just because somebody's been sitting in your wheel. Compare it to a road race. If you're in the breakaway for 50 kilometers and there's one guy in your wheel saying, I'm not going to work because in the group behind, it's 4 minutes behind, I have 2 teammates, and then you go to the finish line and you get beaten in the sprint. It's super frustrating. I've had it in races myself as well. I do get his frustration, but I don't think there's anything he can do against it except maybe just gain that 1% form so that he can actually drop them. But today, then again, wasn't the hardest parcours either to be able to drop someone.
Yeah, I think the comparison to the road is definitely fair. As to what they could do about it, I don't think there is too much you can do about it. Maybe just hope that eventually Pauwels Sauzen kind of breaks off. But the only way I see that happening is if Zweig decides to go for himself again or go somewhere else. I don't think Iserbyt or Van Toornhout will leave the team. Van Toornhout seems perfectly fine being a second guy or even a third guy to Iserbyt and Zweig, whereas Eli, of course, doesn't quite seem to be happy to be working for the team. So I don't really see how Aerts is going to get the support. I only think that Lau and Zweig could maybe break off from the team and destroy what they currently have right now.
But then if he leaves, it's for next season, and for next season they already have a replacement for Zweig, Rijnkamp. So then it could only work if Zweig would move to Telenet. So then it's a bit more equal in terms of numbers. But you said you don't think that there's anything he can do. Aerts said that he could possibly try a new tactic. Do you guys have any clue what he could mean? Or is there even another tactic that he could use?
The only other tactic I see is just sit on the wheel of Iserbyt and hope that he's good enough to take him to victory.
Yeah, I would have played it a little bit smart in the sense of not going full. I think he put too much into the fact of not bringing Van Toornhout and Iserbyt back, or not allowing them to come back. He could have played a little bit smarter. Maybe use only 80-70% of your energy. Let maybe Van Toornhout come back, counter every attack. I mean, that would have maybe played more in his cards, and maybe would have saved that little bit more energy to win in the sprint.
Yeah, that's fair that he could have done that, but of course he makes those decisions in the heat of the moment. He was probably frustrated, and if you're frustrated, you can't think rationally anymore, and then he probably just thought, I can't let Van Toornhout come back. But I think if Van Toornhout would have come back in the last lap, that he couldn't have done much, because it's not really easy to overtake there, and considering the fact that Van Toornhout was giving it 110% the entire last 20 minutes of the race, he would probably have been dead and wouldn't have done much in the sprint at that point. But for Aerts, I mean, I think if you go to a harder parkour, like let's say Gaverets in a few weeks' time, if he is again against these numbers here, I think he would be able to pull it off then, because he does look to have the upper hand at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, look, we already see that the team is vulnerable with Iserbyt not showing, the form he had so far. Zweig was not so good at the beginning of the season. Now has a very good period. I would say Mr. Momentum at this point. But we have to see what's gonna bring, and December can be a very tough month. If most of the races will go through, and then you never know, maybe he would win then 5-6 races and all the frustration is gone. So we have to wait and see what happens this season, and maybe he doesn't need a teammate, or Thibaut Nys, we don't know.
Yeah, and about Van der Haar, he always is up there in the results, but Van der Haar usually has this slow start, and then throughout the race he rides from group to group and picks up picks up spots and then comes close. Like, I mean, the Koppenberg, that was atypical for Van der Haar. More the way that he rode in Niel and the way he rode at the European Championships. That's the more how he rides his races, and then you're not really an asset to the team, because in the end you're there, but you've overtaken the guys that are dropped at the front. You haven't helped them drop, so that's kind of, I mean, it's kind of harsh what Art said about Van der Haar, but on the other hand, Van der Haar hasn't really been able to provide a lot of help in the last 2 races, and that's mainly what he was on about Niel and Leuven. Let's take a look at the entire top 10 then. We saw that Laurensweek took the win in front of Toon Aerts and Michael van Toornout. European champion Elie Isebiet finished in 4th in front of Lars van der Haar, who ended 5th. Then we have Dan Soete, Vincent Baestaans, Niels van der Putten, Ryan Kamp, and Quinten Hermans rounds off the top 10. It's kind of the usual names that we see here in the top 10, not really someone that stands out, is there?
I would tend to disagree. I think Vincent Baestaans rides one of the best crosses I have seen him ride in a really long time, and it is kind of a Niels van der Putten parcours, but it's still really nice to see him up there.
I have to agree, but it's in a way it's true. It's a little bit the usual suspects. I think for Hermans it was a little bit disappointing. I would think, especially considering the fact that it was a faster race that would normally suit him. This point it didn't, only managing 10th. So but in the end it's there is no real strange name going in the top 10, and I think this is a little bit how we're going to see the season shape up without the big guys coming later this season.
Yes, and then indeed Vincent Baestaans isn't the name that's really in the top 10. He's the only name that really stands out here. Quite a surprise that he finishes here in 7th, and Niels van der Putten, I mean, he's been around that top 10 in quite a lot of races in the beginning of the season, 2 times in the top 10, and Niel was in the top 10 today again, so I think I agree with this. This is kind of the way that this season is developing, but perhaps when Van der Poel comes back into the field and Wout van Aert, who is going to make his entrance into the field in 2 weeks' time, perhaps then we will see some shifts in the top 10, and definitely from parcours to parcours it can shift, but for the time being it's kind of the same names that are up there, but there's nothing really wrong with that because we're seeing some entertaining battles for the win.
I also think we shouldn't forget that Gianni Vermeers and Tim Merlier have yet to make their entrance into the field as well. And those two should be able to battle for some near top 5 places.
Indeed, but on the other hand, I haven't heard a lot about when they are planning to come into the field. Maybe it has been announced, but I'm not too sure on that. But I agree, especially Tim Merlier is definitely a really talented guy. Last year he got some podiums, top 5. So those guys coming into the field would definitely make an impact on the results. I think we've then had it all for the men's race.
No, I would like to point out an abysmal performance by Corné van Kessel in 24th.
Yeah, that's true. Corné van Kessel had an absolute shocker of a race, finishing 24th, like Twan said, behind Thibaut Nys. No real explanation for it either. Maybe tiredness or not his parkour. I mean, we do know that he likes the heavier, muddier parcourses better than this one, but still 24th, it's a shock. Behind the likes of Jim Arnouts, Timo Ruek, Steve Chanel, Dieter Zweek, not names where you expect Corné van Kessel to be around, especially considering his performance in Niel.
Yeah, exactly. As you said, the parcours might have really not suited him. I don't quite know how he started, but I think it wasn't that bad. But yeah, it doesn't really look good, especially after a very promising performance in Niel.
We also don't have to, don't forget it's only an Ethias Cross. It's a cross with prestige, but it's not the cross that goes with the classifications that are the most important ones. So that, and adding up on that Niel was only on Wednesday, and then you have a race on Saturday. Those things add up. If you had a bad first lap, maybe you don't have the motivation to continue, and you're like, okay, I had enough of today. we have next week, we have a new race, new chances, and we see what happens.
Next week is the Super Prestige on the Merksplas, and currently there's a lot of bad weather forecasted, so perhaps we could see a muddy race there that suits Corné van Kessel better. But with that, I think we've had it for the men's race, this time, for real. So Twan, take it away. What happened in the women's race?
In the women's race, we saw a rocket start for Perrine Clausel. After a good performance in the European Championships, she got off to a great start, was really able to stay out of traffic and to attack early on. Behind, we had a pretty usual group of 5 Dutch women. This time, it wasn't Kastelein in there though for the Credit Shop Friestads team. It was Manon Bakker. Eventually, Annemarie Worst and Celine Del Carmen Alvarado decided that enough was enough. They were going to go around Lucinda Brandt and try and close the gap. They managed to do this, and Perrine Clausel swiftly fell back. In this process, the other 3 people from the front group were able to return, and gaps really never started to exist again. The second to last lap, there seemed like Manon Bakker was having some mechanical issues again. She was dropping on pretty weird places, but she didn't go into the pits, which was a bit weird. She ends up finishing 5th here, wasn't quite able to keep up, but again, a very solid performance. Then it was Denise Betsma who launched an attack going into the pump track that they, or is it a pump track?
Pump track, yes.
Yeah, okay. So, into there, it was Celine Del Carmen Alvarado who decided that Lucinda Brandt wasn't the right person to close the gap, and she was right, very much so, because coming out of it, Lucinda Brandt had already lost 2 seconds to Alvarado, and Alvarado was on the wheel of Betsma. Worst didn't quite seem to have it today and got stuck behind Brandt, who tried to chase back on, but as they came onto the final straight, it was Betsma in front and Alvarado in second wheel with a gap to Brandt and Worst, and Alvarado came over and won the sprint ahead of Betsma, as Brandt won the sprint behind for 3rd place.
Another really interesting race, as we are kind of used to by now in the women's race, but if you look at it, it was a great race if you ask me. In the last lap, I mean, basically if we just focus on the last lap, because that's when the race really got decided, we had the 5 woman group that was battling, but we saw some mistakes. Alvarado and Brandt, do you guys think that really the pressure was on and they made that because of pressure?
I think the Alvarado crash in the last lap was quite a weird one, but how easily she came back, or seemingly easily she came back, really, well, it spoke very well for her.
Yeah, and that was an extra reason for me to think that she was, I mean, there was a serious pace then, the time that she crashed, so I thought she might have been under pressure, and under pressure you make mistakes, or like when Brandt crashed, she crashed in the downhill. It looked like she was taking too much risks to try and pressure the people behind her, and that in the end cost her. Brandt finishing 3rd, Alvarado actually coming back to win, which does show that she was the strongest. But I think they just that those mistakes, they were caused because they were being pressured by the people in the front.
Yeah, I also think that Brandt was just struggling a little on that corner the whole race. And just a little bit of pressure from behind that finally made her take a little too much risk. Of course, doing very well in not letting anyone pass, or at least just Betsma pass. So that was very well done by her, but that definitely could have been because of the pressure.
And this just shows that on a fast parkour like this, it does favor a rider like Manon Bakker, but it just shows how competitive the field is at this point, because just 9 seconds between the numbers 1 and 5, and for most of the race you could throw a blanket over them. If we take a look then at the entire top 10, we had Alvarado in first, Betsema in second, Brandt in third, Worst in fourth, Bakker in fifth. Then we saw Clausel, Vos, Van Empel, Kastelein and Laura Verdonschot. So if we look here, we already discussed what happened in the front of the race most of the time, but we also had Annemarie Worst. She didn't have the best of days. It wasn't terrible either, but this is just not a parcours for her, was it?
No, I don't think it's a parcours for her, indeed. Not too much of the technical stuff, a lot of tempo racing, and I think you saw it in the fact that she wasn't quite able to get around Lucinda Brandt, that she didn't quite have what was necessary today to take that victory.
Then we also have Clauzel in the top 10. We talked about her in the European Championships where she got 5th. That was kind of a surprise back then, and I mean, she went under the radar there. Not many attention from the broadcasters, but here with the lightning start that she had, leading the race for quite a while, GCN commentators thought that she was going to win. Personally, I thought that Alvarado and Vorst were going to close it, but definitely a good performance. She comes from mountain biking, so I think this is really a name that we should keep an eye out on because she's only 26. Definitely some room for improvement. Don't know how long she's been doing cyclocross for, but it doesn't seem to be a really long while, at least not at this level.
Yeah, I think it's really nice to have someone that's not from the Netherlands doing very well in the women's cross, taking that early lead, really showing that she is there and that she's willing to take a risk, that she has a lot of confidence in herself, and I think those are certainly key factors in the process.
I mean, she's been riding cyclocross now for a couple of years, but it's just a steady improvement, and she looks to have made an extra step, and this time she ends 6th, but the next time, especially considering the fact that she was one of the only ones to actually be able to ride up that hill, if we go to a race like Namur, I would put her down for contention for the victory or a podium.
Yeah, definitely. She even rode up hills that some of the men were struggling with, which makes it even more impressive. And it's seriously impressive what she did there the first few laps.
There you can definitely see that the mountain bike experience comes into play.
I would say though that the fact, she had a very good European race, and also this race was pretty good for her. But we have to not forget that in Koppenberg she lost out quite big time. I think she was only outside of the top 20. I think 21st something.
Yeah, she was.
Yeah, that's true.
So, like, at that point, you should also realize that maybe she needs still a couple of races in to get that in, and especially a race like Namur would be very hard for her in a way.
It could be, but Namur is still quite some time away, somewhere around the Christmas period. But I think that could ultimately be... I mean, I think the Koppenberg, it was her first race here in Belgium. It could take some time for her to get into a rhythm, but that she's kind of found that rhythm now, and it's definitely looking good for her. I mean, you don't end 5th and 6th in 2 consecutive races by accident.
No, definitely not, and we just hope that she can continue this line, because it would be very nice to have a different nation than the Netherlands dominating the top 5.
Yeah, and just behind Clauzel we see 2 names, Vos and Van Empel, 2 names that are developing themselves into consistent top 10 riders. Vos has ridden 4 races, 4 times in the top 10. Van Empel has, I think, 4 consecutive top 10 finishes now as well. Yeah, 4 consecutive top 10 finishes for her, with, of course, for both Vos and Van Empel, one of those was the Under-23 European Championships, but still, that means that in the last 3 races they rode with the elites, they got to a top 10 position, and especially Vos, I'm pretty impressed by her, because by the looks of what type of rider she is, this wasn't a Parkers for her either.
Yes, and I mean, I would also say the fact that I think we pointed it out last race, but she still misses a little bit of those things you need to know to understand what cyclocross is all about. Little things, stepping off your bike, stepping on your bike. If she improves on that, dude, she's gonna be the next thing in the top 5 for sure.
Yeah, I think so as well. And then the last thing that I think we have to point out is actually 2 things. The disappointments, actually, it's Kastelein in 9th, not good, and it also marked the beginning of the season for some of the Americans, Honsinger, Faringer, and Caitlin Keogh, but they all ended outside the top 20, with Faringer even ending in 36th. Not a great day for most of those. The Americans, I mean, it's easy to explain for them. They needed to quarantine for 2 weeks when they came here, I think. But for Kastelein, it's a bit harder to explain, because it should have been a Parkers for her, but she only ended in 9th.
Yeah, I mean, for the Americans, it's very hard to, with 0 races under your belt. I don't know if they did some races in America itself. I think they did.
I'm not sure. I know that Katie Compton did, but I'm not sure about Honsinger and Caitlin Kiu and Farring. I'm not too sure what they did, but perhaps they did. But there's still a big difference between riding a UCI race or a local race.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just getting thrown into the deep and you have to swim, and imagine if you can't swim at that point, then you will be drowning. And I think, to be honest, it isn't the worst result, especially considering that for them it's just the start of the season with not so many races under their belt. So maybe they can get a little bit more into the top 20 and even a top 10.
But Twan, then, what do you think that went on with Kastelein?
It's just very hard to explain. As you said, this should be a parcours that suits her. But then again, sometimes when I watch Kastelein, I don't know what suits her. I don't know what doesn't suit her, and I have the feelings that with Kastelein, one day on the same parcours, she might nearly win, and the next day she is outside of that front group for whatever reason. And I think this might have been one of those days.
It definitely could have been, but let's just hope for Kastelein that she gets things back together and starts. I mean, all I see is start getting things back together. It hasn't even been that bad. Third on the Koppenberg, fourth in Niel. It's just, you're kind of right. It's hard to say which parcours really suits her, but let's just hope that Leuven and the European Championship, that those were just incidents, and that she gets back for her own sake, that she gets back to the level that she had on the Koppenberg, and she can start doing that in the Merksplas. So that's near Hoogkerke next week. Last year the race got cancelled because of a storm. This year the race, fingers crossed, will go through. I don't think they would be able to survive another missed race. And I think we will be having a preview to that, because it's going to be quite an important race for the Super Prestige, especially considering how it stands in the classifications. It's going to mark the halfway point. So I think we'll be taking a preview on that somewhere in the middle of this week. That podcast should be able to come out on Wednesday or Thursday. And then next weekend, we will obviously be back with another Cyclocross Social podcast about the Merksplas Super Prestige race. Thank you, Issam and Twan, for joining me.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for hosting.
And then I would like to wish you guys the best of weeks in the weeks ahead. See you. Goodbye.